Calamity reigns in your name, as all that knows to vanish exists in mine.
I dragged my feet down a sidewalk of cracks and bruises that I knew by heart, because it's the only thing you can notice when you're looking down. It tricked me every morning into returning to its deceitful road as it pointed towards humanity. Now arrives the people of gray. A day began with my pure and precious belittlement, but now its lingering power fades and comes only as a firm replacement for good morning. An elder would say, "Welcome back. Starve and die. I'll pretend to remember you," followed by static and robotic laughter. This was so routine that the days without it might have been worse, much like feeling where a scar should have been after a cut is almost healed, and missing the sensation of his crevice, even in adversity of how much it had hurt. Welcome back is all I heard. Arriving late, I felt like royalty walking through the main entrance of my school. Children's heads whipped towards me and quickly darted away. I clearly asserted righteous superiority, and they could all but steal a glance without my subjection to torture. But what I received was no regal treatment, and I was sure that I would succumb to their torment. Rectified in this was the beast of flies, your Beelzebub, and yes, Aaron. It was a frighteningly tall, dark, and smug amalgamation existing only to obliterate my attempts of lively defiance. I could so much as barely breathe in to spit out its name. This one's routine ran in tandem with mine, and any time I could so much as gasp, it would be there to vacuum the breath from the holes of my lungs. It was relentless. That day. That day where everything I had left was soullessly ripped from my weakened grasp, started like this. I shoved books into my locker from the weekend as the tattered edges of the tomes distracted me with comfort. I dragged my finger down the side of a page. I did it for the blood. And as for my blood, its smell could entice Aaron from miles. It wanted more to satisfy its craving for conflict, cruelty, self-deliverance. Now, Aaron's cult initiates stood behind my locker door waiting for their word. It yearned in lust for me to begin its day of indulgence, eat me insatiably. Its mouth grew with saliva thinking, edging slowly on the cusp of commencement. Who would be the first to reap the quietness of this morning? Time counted down as everyone hid their violence in their stomachs. Aaron broke this stale-tasting silence. Puny, as if to say,
Mortal.
It spoke with the most disgusting smile, the kind that pinched eyes and tore through skin with rancid dripping claws. The buzzing from its mouth reeked of decay. The flies' bloated bodies molested the inside of this fuming, gaping hive. Its gums were hollow with larvae. They throbbed as festering slugs crawled down to form spongy teeth. Its speech was in the form of vomit. Worthless, it said, spilling out maggots resting on its shirt. I was greeted by the most ravenous face casted down below the sharpest, grayest eyes. I felt the filthiest ice capture my creature inside, packed sharply around my slow-moving blood. Its food is awake, starved only to feast. So this time, fuck it. I threw my fist first. I barely hit its twisted face as it absorbed my hand, much like punching into dog shit. The sludge erupting from Aaron's face dissolved the pale floor tiling. I became encircled by dull, barely bubbling acid gnawing at my reactant shoes. As the floor deepened, these students left slow, forming depressions. Aaron grabbed me with loose yet strong gray extremities as their pestilent followers peeled off its swelling back. The worshippers of bugs and hate swarmed the vacancy surrounding my locker. And with that lock I knew jail. Drawn and quartered as fights broke out between 4 limbs and 12 hands. To be shaken free by fear would have me released by spite. Harm, lust, shit. The building decomposed with the weight of bodies sinking in place. These mossy, rocky piers could barely stop rolling to watch. Now, a soldier emerged from the trenches. This was James. He parted these people and quickly stood between Aaron and I.
At last.
A brilliant break in routine. James was here. He was finally here. Prove to them why, through eons of torture, whether self-proclaimed or self-inflicted, you'd still come back for me. His grip was stern and his brawn was mighty. He was a bit taller and much stronger than I was, much like myself in stature, lighter hair color, sharp cheeks, but with bold, yellowish eyes. He postured between us, staring both Aaron and death into its lack of a soul. Whose attention does he deserve most? Do something, Aaron snapped as a frown gathered on its face. James didn't speak. He didn't feed into the swarming, brewing bloodlust. He helped me up, and they locked eyes again. There was a dead, silent stalemate, with neither saying a word nor breaking their stare. I looked over James's shoulder as Aaron liked looking at a beast from the safety of a cage. Let's go. We're done here, James said. Fuck you, James, spat Aaron, before allowing us to walk backwards. We fell back narrowly, fleeing the impending riot. James could see the weight leaving my shoulders as we turned down a corner. The bombings have yielded to a new form of diplomacy, and James had brokered temporary peace. Thank you for him. He's the stoic who defeats dragons, saving entire towns from evil. He was a god among men. His mercy was all that was left to me when recreating and destroying the celestial rock. I hope you remember that. I'm sorry I couldn't get here faster. James unloaded. I didn't want him to apologize. You were
Here, right?
James smiled and waited.
Huh. That's good.
And with that smile and reassuring phrase, I felt warmer. A silk kite casted the only shades worth of protection covering us. A harmful burn seared outlines onto our bodies. That velvet lasping, we wore them together. What family, what siblings, what money. The school grounds exhibited those encircling ritualists, and their blood god waned.
What god favors us more than not?
We were stuck. These similarities acted as reinforcement to an already indestructible bridge between our lives. We continued down the hall. One of the last good feelings I felt that day was seeing James. We had no classes together this year, which only worsened my overcast of depression and the ability to heed evil from slipping into my day without his watch. He amazed me with every unexpected gesture of radiant kindness. Words that never needed an explanation were thrown my way with all good intention. Not a drop of doubt could form at the base of my skull, proving reason otherwise to comfort my cowardly soul, besides my proclamation of self-deprecation. And that was care. I could imagine remembering such care, if only savoring the past meant you wouldn't crawl back into the fostering hole that you've grown far too old for and much too big for. I would stop thinking just before my happiest memory. A more evocative telling clouded the thought of what was, and the more you fall back into the soft opening of your past, the harder it becomes to walk with its ancient disparity. Good fool. Do bring me more noticeable renditions of played recordings. I wrote them down perfectly, word for word. I would strip the skin from my scalp if it meant I could trickle my hand over the smooth warmness of this memory. It's supposed to rain today, James said. Fine, haha. I love the rain, I proclaimed. I love the rain too. But if it doesn't rain, that means we can play outside all day. It's so hot. So, I want to play in the water. But then I'll get in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble again. You won't this time. How? I have an idea, James said. Let's walk to the bridge, the one next to the firehouse. Okay, sure, I said. With a couple miles worth of walking between his house, my house, and the fire station's underpass, we skipped and cheered the entire way, looking straight up at the lack of clouds. See? No rain today, as I gladly pointed up. Yeah, haha, no rain! We bumped and fake punched each other's arms with made-up piffs, pows, and booms. We kept our eyes open for cars crossing the street. We stopped at every intersection. We waved at strangers with frantic excitement. All was well. We didn't even feel tired. I ran ahead once no cars had entered the road. Come on, James, I want to see the water. Not enough ever happened, nor did a good amount of people drive in our neighborhood to make us worry. The world was open, alive, yet quiet. The air was blessed with the beautiful song of two children's joy. As we approached the firehouse, we stopped just short of passing under the bridge. Looking across the sidewalk, we saw an older man dressed in uniform. We weren't technically allowed in the water, but if we could sneak past this guy, we were free to do whatever. We were stopped anyway. "Hello, you two, staying out of trouble?" "Yes, sir, we are," I said. "You know, it was supposed to rain today. You two aren't too far from home now, all right?" "No, sir," I lied. "We live really close to here." "We wanted to play in the water," said James. "Play in the water, huh? Behind the station?" the man said slowly. Yes, please," said James. "Well, because you asked nicely, and because it's so hot," he paused, "and because it's just me here today. Go ahead, kids." He smiled at us, peeking his rosy cheeks from underneath his white mustache. "Just be safe now, you hear?" "Yes, sir," James and I said at the same time. "Heh. I'll be right here, too, if you need me." We smiled and waved with our half-toothless smiles as we hopped just past the station. "Let's go! Ha ha!" Peering down the stream just under the bridge, we saw nobody, unusually. "Finally! This is the best day ever!" I yelled. We ran into the stream until we fell in deep. The sounds, the laughter, the combination of splashes and slaps and woos and cheers was a hymn written with watery blue ink. Time moved in slow motion and only sped up with the heavy chasing in the waist-deep water. I controlled the waves with my magic powers, and James blocked himself with his magic shield. But he still got wet anyway. It was the middle of the day, and so warm. We sat back on the shore, and I taught James how to skip rocks. He wasn't really good and ended up just throwing fist-sized stones into the water. We spent the rest of our time looking for bigger rocks to hoist into the shallow. We were amazed that a large splash was the result of a larger stone. We stared at each other in shock every time we made a larger kaploosh. "That was awesome!" "I know, right? Let's throw that one next." "Yeah!"
Oh, what fun.
We were getting tired and our clothes were pretty wet. Now, this was the part I forgot would get me in trouble, and that was a death sentence in my house. "James, my clothes are wet." "That's okay. They'll dry by the time we walk home." "That's your plan? Are you sure?" "Trust me, you'll be all dry by then." "Okay, sure," I said. Then we heard that sound that drove miles to children, danced to its own song, vibed to the beat of laughter, and created fun from the last of the summer's cold air. "Ice cream truck!" We trudged up the creekside and out onto the hot road. The truck playing music stopped just across from the firehouse. We wrung out our clothes the best we could and quickly made our way over. When we got closer, we saw the same smiling fireman with 2 towels outstretched for us. We ran as fast as we could in our wet wares and stopped just underneath the man. "Would you kids like some ice cream? I waved down the truck for you two, and I have a $5 bill with your names on it," he said, closing his eyes with a scrunching of his cheeks. "Yes, please," James and I said in unison. "Well, here's your towels, and the ice cream man will wait until you're dry." "Thank you. Thank you so much," said James. We hung up our clothes and ran over without our shirts. When we arrived, the ice cream man peeked out of the side window. "Hey, you two, what can I get for you?" "1 chocolate and 1 vanilla, please." "Of course. $4, please." I handed him the money and made him keep the change. The sun tried melting our cones just as fast as we could eat them. "Thank you." "My pleasure, kiddos. And what a beautiful day out." We hyperactively nodded and continued our ice cream, covering our faces in the white and brown flavors. Our eyes grew the same way as our stomachs, wider and wider. The sugary delight forced us to hop in place and dance to the soothing, upbeat music. The ice cream man nodded to the fireman, and the fireman waved back. "What a nice old man to do something so kind for you kids. You made sure to thank him now, did you?" "We did," we both said together.
It was beautiful.
The ice cream man touched his hands to his hips. "You know, it was supposed to rain today." The day followed out like it usually did until the last class before lunch. That day of all days, the teacher called out to the rascals of dread, heeding his call. A well-dressed and rather regal and eccentric creature guided the class, from the buttons climbing up to their lavish white-colored tie, to the elegant shine of their leather shoes laced neatly like each individual hair of its scalp. They were mannerly and polite to the students they didn't teach, but to the ones that dared resign their souls to prerequisites of college mathematics would have been fed insults and gilded smiles. It stood hiding black poisons failing to fume from its mouth. I was particularly resistant to breaking down after years of hardening, for what now I could see was for nothing. Like the ocean's hard waves on my stone's rough edges, I was beaten down to a small, smooth boulder. The class was discussing something bland and ultimately useless, but it was still enough of significance that this festering, slimy insect thought it should interrupt my lamenting of my mourning to publicly humiliate me. "Ah, here's someone who isn't paying attention," it delightfully signaled to me. "Why don't you answer this question?" It said, tapping the board under a math equation. Oh, how awfully it tried to hide its pleasure watching my unease. I don't know, I resigned. And that was
Precisely.
what it wanted to hear. I truly made its day. "Well," it interrupted, "you see," uncurling a smile and revealing putrid, jagged, yellowing teeth. "It doesn't matter now. We can move on to someone else." And that should have been all, except it really is a shame. Perhaps someone like you wouldn't want to pay more attention, especially since your parents pay for all your school supplies and, well, it just seems like it all goes to waste, no? You don't seem to care about that at all. That money could be used for something much more valuable, like maybe a car or new shoes, seeing that you're, well, I suppose you can just be content with whatever it is you do have. This disgusting, regurgitated slug dared speak, and all while barely containing the joy it received from knowing I would dwell on this speech for years and relive this moment whenever I felt like its words held true. I slumped back into my chair and it continued its lesson as every student's eyes assaulted me with painful stares made of metal seas and offshore offenses. Next was lunch, and the last chance before the end of the day to decompress and see James. We sat alone at a table meant for 8. No one would dare sit with us. We were thought of some kind of disease that plagued the school's lunchroom, and getting too close would have others catching something, possibly the understanding of how well off they might actually be. We would eat and discuss our day so far, usually consisting of something terrible that happened to us, like harassment from some kids, or how our morning was ruined by some sly remark. Today happened to be particularly unfortunate, making James grimaced at every word that teacher had spoken to me. There's something that binds people better than anything else, and that's realizing that you both hate the same things. Like a military alliance that grows into a global power, crushing all that stands beneath it. That's absolutely disgusting. They can't get away with that. They will, though. There was a reoccurring theme of teachers getting away with completely stepping out of line, facing no repercussions. It was as if every employee was working together against us. I was sometimes convinced they wanted to see us wade into school every day, feet dragging and ambitions low, any hope that we might actually enjoy our day shattered at the entrance. I had known so few people besides those who bear no mentioning, the ones that feed on your frown. This is ridiculous. We can't do a single goddamn thing, James resigned. He never let these things get to him. He stood up, he stared down onto me, and in a way that made me feel like I could rise with him, like I could be made equal to the world through him. Lunch ended, and James and I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been separated by war and we were never going to see each other alive again. "Wait for me outside, at the main entrance," he said. "Sure," I said.
This way, time has begun.
So we left each other to face the day, and I continued to my next class. My backpack felt heavier that day. It weighed me down with the frivolous writing scribed across the millionth duplicate of the last sketch tome inciting horrible teachings. I couldn't figure out why, but it seems clear now. It was the weighing of some faint realization pulling down on my shoulders, hardening my back and stiffening my neck. The realization that my life was nothing, and nothing was waiting for me after school except James. I couldn't rely on him forever for protection or guidance, and that terrified me. What is my life outside of following this routine? Should I even bother continuing, or was any attempt to create a sustainable life in vain? I wanted a better life. I always tried to grasp that. But was this just not my fate?
I thought.
What had I done? Besides, James and I both realized we had nothing and no one and nothing and no one. If he wouldn't have missed me, I know I'd be long dead. If I tried to list why I should have lasted this long, I'd start by writing James's name. I wouldn't know what else to write about. My last class was ruining and difficult. Not the material, but the people. I wasn't interested enough for the teacher to ever pay attention, and I still never knew their name, truly. They seemed like they would hate to answer to someone like me. Awfully smug. But if they were the worst part of my day, I was lucky. If anything, this class was an insult, being neglected and forced to sulk in the back of the room, full of children with craters for eyes and your own mind. I could feel how dark my face looked. Every word of the lesson weighed on my mug. If I was having a breakdown, it would be soon. Soon being crushed under the impending frustration of silence. The small whelps gnawed on their collars uninterruptedly as their eyes glazed over the desk in front of the room. They all wanted to free themselves and fly out of the windows as soon as their teeth were sharp enough. The taskmaster would not dare to point or call. That wand sliding quietly behind their back held out only for if those miniature dragons had gone loose. Like eating the flesh of the same animal that stands in front of you, the fear begins for the human that dared to drop such a similar meal, and then puke. The school day ended and I walked out of the main entrance for James only to be greeted by a bloated resemblance of a human. Aaron threw a fist across the door and landed on my cheekbone. My head bounced off the bricks outside the door and I was ripped away by flatulent devourers. Decide what that looks like to people surrounding you. They hated me. They would watch a kicking, screaming, scratching, biting student in the clutch of 5 cultists leading me to their leader's altar for sacrifice. I imagined I would die, but not like this. Oh no, let me waste away in my own misfortunes. I was dragged from the schoolyard and way off to the back to our favorite alley. I'd never felt so much physical pain. But when they were done, the bruises weren't what hurt. "This is for this morning, you scum fuck," Aaron said. It landed meteoric strikes casted from the frozen moons of Saturn. It ripped down sculpted obsidian across the underside of my carcass. The mummified wrap of swelling gorged upon my bloody body. Only the quivering of my jagged movement meant more was left to eat. Fill your stomachs with my vile guts of my hemorrhaging, hearkening heart. Do bear my beating. You belong here. You deserve this.
Prove it.
With that last exasperated breath, I gasped with a final clench. Relentlessness. They kicked in my ribs. They didn't stop until I passed out, but I wish they had hurt me worse. I knew I needed to be hurt. I thought,
Please keep going. Beat me past this.
as if I deserved bleeding. I was beginning to agree that I was what they said I was. I embodied waste. Waste of clothes, waste of skin, waste of breath. I could only live to see James come. The sound of a rusted motor fading away required at least one fleeting glance.
Show me my fate.
Aaron's bastard lemon. The cracked windshield, missing headlight, and rusting body drove away. The once startling engine that brought anxiety now brings a shred of peace. Eventually, I felt alone enough to crack open my eyes. The dark circles that fly between the sun's wrath beat down cloaks of cowardly clouds. They would dare to shed wasted water. I found myself in James's lap. He was crying after the hours had passed. What if I had a brother who had nearly died, and I could only hold on to him until he woke on his own? I could barely mutter a word, having my chest full of rocks, not knowing what sound to begin with. James put his hand on my head and closed his eyes, crushing tears down onto his cheeks. To see that person cry, that messiah of water, that blessing of rain that rolled down over cheeks until it found your drying person. Those drops dripped harshly, yet without callous. The awful realization that the frost of a cold world creeps on everyone. He slowly helped me stand up, and we started moving when I could on my own. We walked for an hour without saying a word. Each touch of my shoe shook the bones back into the conjunctions of my cage. The rushing oceans of luminous liquid dried, and with their death did we two meet. Then finally, he spoke. Please forgive me. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and just wondered what reason he considered to apologize. He looked so ruined with himself. I could have helped you, he said. A sharp drop fell from the sky, perfectly placed upon his eye. This was rain and nothing else. I did this to you. James could sob. He stopped dead in the middle of the road, clenching his fists and shaking until he finally let go and started bawling into the hardness of the street. I wish I could harm the road as he did. I'd held him close with whatever strength I still owned. We stood in a vacant roadway just holding on. I couldn't let go yet. We finally backed away and looked at each other. With tears filling our hollowing eyes, we did not speak. We started walking again for as long as we could. We thought there was no use in returning to the war. We were deserters, after all. Let's not go home,
Let's disappear.
I said. We hold out for each other, right? James seemed upset, but responded. I couldn't lose you. I don't know how I could go on. I won't go on. So it started then, our indirect suicide pact. How long we would last was now up to each other and their willingness to not let the other slip. But however long I would last is not a question anymore.
If you die, I will die.
We agreed, so we kept walking. We wondered what the world would be like without us, and we were saddened when we realized it would be mostly unchanged, and perhaps awfully for the better. No one's life depended on ours. It was actually extremely upsetting thinking of how little impact we had on the world. What a difference I've made now. Ending up somewhere besides a misused gas station or a raped building, both seeing the worst of human oppression, would seem too poetic. We passed speechless, still coming to terms with how we were the broken and neglected buildings, holding back our fears in our empty stomachs. So without words, we walked faster until finally we could both look at each other through the sight of screeching darkness, searching from somewhere somewhat full of life and excitement that could cheer us up, but none to be found. Thinking now, that was the absolute best moment of my life. I was spending my last moments with someone I loved. We saw our movie, the worthless gathering of a less than 20-year compilation beginning without understanding where it started. We walked out of that theater the happiest people on the planet, and at the time, my mouth would smile for me, even when I didn't want it to. The moment was threatening me with syringes of dopamine, and I'd rather not be vaccinated with lies of false happiness. I wouldn't know what it felt like enough to say otherwise. Did people feel this? That even with the widest smile you could weep through your bright upturned eyes? That your faces didn't have to come together and agree on what you felt? How eyes could have looked ruined with a mouth made of gold, or at the very least gilded teeth showing through your black lips. And so we walked.
We were laughing.
My soreness in my ribs and bruises on my cheeks sank deep into the dark cavities of my blistered eyes with every relinquished, clutching chuckle. It was a minor sound, one that forgot what its own voice sounded like living underground, blind to the vision of your own hands as they feebly reach out in front of you. And when we turned the corner, we arrived with it. My smile left my mouth. It watched us, peering upon our chest, focusing on our slowly beating bodies. Its time stuck in parallel, streaming like a direwolf from across a raging rapid. You don't want anything to do with this, James remembered to say. Its face fell down only as its eyes leveled its head, stitched still and fixed on the stones, pulsing out of our hollow sockets. Any movement would only narrow its gaze finer. It starved immensely. The only startling would be the shaking rupturing through its stomach and out of its matted, hairy throat. Its legs locked into the greasy cement as it leaned forward, and as its shadow was consumed by the next darkening light, it grew 10 times taller. The back of this ratchet creature hunched and rattled inside its burned skeleton. Its eyes barely showed through the gaunt darkness. So this is it, spoke James. The enormous head snapped up, holding its chin above its neck. That scrape of a dragged step ruined the song of serenity, and that much was left unscratched. Those gnarly talons plowed into the rocky street-side sidewalk. This instance fractured like a crystal being splintered into glass dimensions. It marched into agonizing doom, unwillingly devouring the land as it roamed straight through mountains of scrap and garbage and shit. Like trudging through filthy snow up to your chest, the determination of discord slowly, deafeningly, slowly rocked back and forth. Afraid of what motion would project disaster, we stepped back without unearthing its pounding. We felt the tendons of our back and shoulders dive into the ground and grapple up into the wasteland's flooring. Prying off our skin revealed our raw persons. This was all. Stunting and grinding teeth stared down the last earthly bound souls to wander the world. The walls of the neighboring buildings began to shake and suffocate us, and as its instrument rose, the force of crueling nature was replaced finally and forever. The fabric of time slowed to an infinitely impossible stance, shredding all of what was of sight and soul in just fractions of a second.
James.
Every tooth moved through his body, twisting him with every passing of steaming metal. I could only watch as he fell back and lost the glow in his eyes. As time threatened to stop, I saw life escape his being. His limp body dropped with a deafening thud. I watched James die. I turned my gaze to its face, my face, trapped in jagged permanence. I stammered, barely conjuring the breath to speak. My eyes broke, my body free from paralysis. Looking back from James, it held its gun weakeningly with compulsions of raspy laughter.
Did you do it?
I don't remember anymore. I see that it's gone. No, not just gone. The resemblance of any human posture was removed from the stain off the tiles of these sidewalk squares.
Oh blood, bathe in the crimson drink of flesh, draw strength from its smell. It covers me. My hands become blades as your men become veins. Expel your dark, pungent aroma of filth. Extinguish the stain of strain of fame and dirt. Grant the lion meager gifts of permanence. Let them choke as they swallow. Fleece the right to devour this poverty. Outline your crooked fence and fabled might. Oh blood, oh drink of flesh.
You don't understand what that means. These words aren't making sense. The poem, now too deeply saturated to be deciphered and littered with anomaly, becomes ruined under faint starlight not meant for the soulful. I remember black, crushing black. Now alone with nothing but a coat housing a familiar of blood, darkness filled my mouth and throat. My eyes burned with blue fire melting out of my face, shaking the very existence off the ground and a filling of its earth to its core. The tantrums began. I was dying, finally, and from the great equalizing glance of perception. Shouting and sirens pushed me off to sleep, and I
still don't remember.